Welcome back to Grimverse History, where we uncover the strange and forgotten sides of history. Tonight, we step into the shadowed court of Spain to uncover the disturbing mystery of Ferdinand VII, a king whose private obsessions quietly shaped a nation's suffering. Behind locked doors, far from battlefields and crowns, Ferdinand VII cultivated desires that terrified his own court. Spain called him the Desired One, yet whispered another name in private. The mystery isn't what Ferdinand did. It's how long everyone pretended not to see it. You step across polished stone floors inside the royal palace of Madrid. Heavy velvet curtains block the sun, keeping the rooms dim even at midday. If stories like this help you relax, drift, or sleep, gently consider liking the video, subscribing to Grimverse History, and turning on notifications. It's the year 1814. Spain is exhausted from war, broken by occupation, and desperate for stability. The people celebrate the return of their king, Ferdinand VII. But while crowds cheer outside palace walls, another story unfolds inside, a story hidden in whispers, locked chambers, and royal secrecy. You're a royal physician in the Palace of Madrid, and the year is 1834. The king is dead, but your work isn't finished. You've been summoned to the private chambers of the late Ferdinand VII for a task so bizarre, so unprecedented, that you question your own sanity. The Queen Regent, Maria Cristina, stands before you with tears in her eyes and a request that chills your blood. Your hands tremble as you approach the bed where Ferdinand's body lies. Even in death, the man who terrorized Spain for 2 decades seems to mock you from beyond the grave. But it's not his face that draws your attention. It's what lies beneath the silk sheets. The thing that defined his reign as much as his cruelty, his paranoia, or his betrayals. Ferdinand, the 7th member, his grotesquely oversized, bizarrely shaped endowment that was simultaneously the source of his deepest shame and his most twisted pride. To understand Ferdinand VII, you must first understand that he was born cursed, not by witchcraft or divine wrath, but by the poisonous legacy of centuries of royal inbreeding. The Spanish Habsburgs and Bourbons had spent generations marrying cousins to cousins, uncles to nieces, creating a genetic nightmare that manifested in everything from mental instability to physical deformities. Born at El Escorial Palace on October 14th, 1784, he was the product of Charles IV and Maria Louisa of Parma, a couple whose own marriage was an arrangement between first cousins. As he grew from child to adolescent, it became clear that nature had played a particularly cruel joke on the future king of Spain. His member began developing in ways that defied medical understanding. By his teenage years, court physicians were already whispering about the royal anomaly, a dong so massive and strangely shaped that it seemed almost alien in its proportions. Contemporary medical records hidden away in Vatican archives for centuries describe Ferdinand's endowment in clinical terms that nonetheless convey the horror of his condition. One physician wrote, "His Royal Highness is afflicted with a member of such extraordinary dimensions and peculiar form that intimate relations may prove challenging." Another was more blunt. "The prince's organ resembles nothing so much as a billiard cue, thin as sealing wax at its base, thick as a man's fist at its extremity, and long enough to serve as a walking stick." The psychological impact on young Ferdinand was devastating. In an era when male anatomy was judged by classical Greek standards, where smaller was considered more refined, more aristocratic, Ferdinand's massive member marked him as a freak of nature. Ferdinand's childhood was a masterclass in dysfunction that would have broken a stronger man and instead forged a tyrant. His father, Charles IV, was weak-willed and preferred hunting to ruling. His mother, Maria Louisa, was a woman of voracious appetites who openly flaunted her affair with Manuel de Godoy, Spain's de facto ruler. Young Ferdinand watched this daily humiliation, absorbing lessons about power, betrayal, and the weakness of trust. The court buzzed with whispers about the prince's condition. Servants giggled behind their hands. Courtiers made subtle jokes, and foreign diplomats reported back to their masters about the Spanish embarrassment. Ferdinand learned early that he was an object of mockery, that his most intimate self was a source of amusement for others. This humiliation bred a deep, festering resentment that would later manifest in his treatment of Spain itself. Ferdinand began to see mockery everywhere, in the respectful bows of his subjects, in the formal addresses of his tutors, in the arranged smiles of potential brides. His paranoia wasn't entirely unjustified. He became secretive, vindictive, and cruel to those who served him. Servants who displeased him would find themselves dismissed or worse. Ferdinand was learning to use the power of his position to compensate for the powerlessness he felt about his body. One particular incident recorded in the memoirs of a court chaplain reveals the darkness growing in Ferdinand's soul when a young page accidentally walked in on the prince changing clothes. Ferdinand didn't simply dismiss him. He had the boy flogged and his family exiled from Madrid. You stand in the corridor outside the chamber, hearing the sudden crack of leather against flesh. You do not see the punishment, but you will never forget the sound. As Ferdinand reached marriageable age, the full extent of his anatomical challenge became clear to the royal physicians. Dr. Francisco Flores, the king's personal doctor, left behind secret notes that provide a disturbing window into the medical reality of Ferdinand's condition. His Majesty's member, Flores, wrote, "Presents a most unusual configuration. The base measures no more than the width of a man's thumb, yet it expands to a circumference that defies natural proportion. The length exceeds that of any recorded human specimen, measuring near to 10 in its natural state, and growing considerably larger when aroused. Most concerning is the peculiar curvature and the presence of what appear to be additional tissue growths that serve no discernible biological function. The royal craftsmen were secretly commissioned to create what they euphemistically called marital aids, specially designed cushions and supports that would allow Ferdinand to function sexually without causing serious injury to his future wives. But he became obsessed with potions and elixir that promised to normalize his anatomy or enhance his fertility. He consumed mixtures of ground rhinoceros horn, powdered pearls, and rare herbs that were supposed to regulate his royal essence. Some potions were meant to shrink his member to normal proportions. Others claimed to enhance his virility despite its unusual shape. All of them were useless. In 1802, Ferdinand married his first cousin, Princess Maria Antonia of Naples and Sicily. The match was arranged when both were still teenagers, and Maria Antonia arrived in Madrid with romantic notions about her future husband. The wedding ceremony was magnificent, as befitted the union of two royal houses. The cathedral filled with music, the streets of Madrid echoed with celebration, and the young couple looked every inch the perfect royal partnership. Maria Antonia was beautiful, intelligent, and genuinely excited about her new life. Ferdinand, for his part, seemed almost normal in public, charming, attentive, and appropriately romantic. But royal weddings end, and wedding nights begin. The first sign of trouble came when Ferdinand's valet approached Maria Antonia's ladies-in-waiting with an unusual request. Special preparations were needed for the royal bedchamber. Custom-made cushions were brought in, along with bottles of oils and salves, and various implements that seemed more medical than romantic. Maria Antonia, sheltered and innocent as most royal brides of her era, understood none of this. When Ferdinand entered the bridal chamber, Maria Antonia's first glimpse of her husband's naked form sent her into hysterics. One lady-in-waiting, writing years later, described the scene. Her Majesty began screaming, as though she had seen the devil himself. She backed against the wall, pointing and crying, "Monster! Monster!" until we feared she had lost her reason entirely. Ferdinand's member, described by witnesses as resembling a great club with a thin handle, was unlike anything the sheltered princess had imagined possible. The sheer size of it terrified her, but it was the bizarre shape, the way it curved and twisted, the strange growths along its length, the almost alien appearance of the whole apparatus that truly broke her composure. Ferdinand's specially trained physicians had to be called in to explain to the horrified princess what would be required of her. The psychological impact on both partners was devastating. Ferdinand, already paranoid and insecure about his condition, became even more twisted when faced with his wife's obvious revulsion. Maria Antonia, meanwhile, developed what modern psychologists would recognize as severe sexual trauma. She began taking larger and larger doses of laudanum, eventually becoming addicted to the substance as a way to escape the horror of her marital duties. Their attempts to produce an heir became a ritualized nightmare that repeated itself with tragic regularity. Ferdinand would summon his physicians, who would prepare the chamber with its specialized equipment. Maria Antonia would be dosed with enough laudanum to make her compliant, but not catatonic. The procedure would be performed with clinical efficiency, after which both parties would retreat to separate wings of the palace to recover from their ordeal. As months turned to years without a successful pregnancy, Ferdinand's desperation reached new heights. Ferdinand ordered the creation of special restraints that would hold Maria Antonia in position during their intimate encounters, preventing her from pulling away or expressing her revulsion. These leather and silk contraptions were crafted by the same artisans who made the king's saddles and hunting equipment, adding a particularly disturbing dimension to the royal workshops. Twice, miraculously, Maria Antonia did become pregnant. The court rejoiced. Ferdinand's confidence soared, and Spain held its breath, waiting for the birth of an heir to the throne. But both pregnancies ended in devastating miscarriages that left the royal couple more traumatized than ever. The first miscarriage in 1804 occurred in the 4th month of pregnancy. The second miscarriage in 1805 was even more devastating. This time, Maria Antonia carried the child almost to full term, before losing it in a labor so difficult and bloody that it nearly killed her. Rather than showing compassion for his wife's suffering, he became convinced that she was deliberately sabotaging their chances of producing an heir. He accused her of taking substances to prevent pregnancy, of deliberately moving in ways that would cause miscarriages, and of harboring secret liberal sympathies that made her unwilling to provide Spain with a proper Catholic heir. Maria Antonia's mental health shattered under the weight of whispered accusations. She became convinced her body was cursed, rejecting Ferdinand's seed due to some hidden sin. You can almost feel the weight of her sorrow as she isolates herself, overwhelmed by guilt. When Maria Antonia died in May 1807, at just 21, the official cause was fever and complications. But her true death was from despair, her body ravaged by sexual trauma and psychological abuse. Rumors quickly spread that Ferdinand poisoned her, tired of her failures and seeking a new wife. In the silence of the palace, Ferdinand seemed relieved by her death, and within weeks, he was already seeking a new wife. He wanted someone who had proven fertility in previous marriages. The weight of his failure crushed him, and he became incapable of genuine connection. You stand in the shadows, watching as Ferdinand tests the limits of his power, punishing anyone who dares to cross him. He began selecting wives who could be manipulated into accepting his demands, while the palace craftsmen created increasingly elaborate marital aids. When Napoleon forced Ferdinand to abdicate, he became a prisoner, a specimen for foreign doctors. His time in captivity was marked by medical experiments, and French doctors described his condition as a monstrous anomaly. In exile, Ferdinand desperately sought brides willing to accept his condition, and upon his return to Spain in 1814, the crowds cheered, but the reality of his failures remained. Ferdinand's priority wasn't governing Spain, it was finding a wife who could give him the heir he desperately sought. His sexual dysfunction had become inseparable from his political failure. His first act as king was commissioning marital aids from Europe. His second wife, Maria Isabel of Portugal, arrived in 1816, full of hope. The wedding ceremony was extravagant, hiding Ferdinand's anxiety. Despite all preparations, the night was filled with screams of terror, not passion. Isabel never recovered, suffering nightmares and trauma. Ferdinand's obsession with secrecy and bizarre medical consultations turned the royal chambers into a laboratory of humiliation. Even after Isabel's death, Ferdinand's quest for an heir could not be delayed by grief. Within months of Isabel's burial, his advisors began negotiating for a third wife. The challenge now was finding a European princess willing to marry a king with such a notorious reputation. The negotiations proved difficult, as several potential brides withdrew after consulting physicians who had served at the Spanish court. Ferdinand's sexual dysfunction had become a diplomatic liability. Eventually, Maria Joseph of Saxony, a 24-year-old princess, agreed to marry Ferdinand in 1819. The third wedding was more subdued, reflecting the court's exhaustion from previous matrimonial disasters. Maria Joseph had been briefed by Saxon physicians and brought her own medical devices and personal physician. Her approach to the marriage was clinical, treating it as a medical challenge rather than a romantic one. The marriage settled into a pattern of scheduled, medically supervised intimacy. Maria Joseph documented their encounters with precision, but this only frustrated Ferdinand, who became paranoid that she viewed him as a medical curiosity. Ferdinand's obsession with his condition grew, while Spain continued its political and economic decline under his reign. Cabinet meetings were postponed, and important decisions delayed as Ferdinand consulted with physicians about new techniques for conception. Revolutions simmered, and Spain had become a European laughingstock. In 1829, after 10 years of clinical matrimony, Maria Joseph became pregnant. The court rejoiced, but Ferdinand's desperation to protect the pregnancy led him to hire extra guards and consult mystics. Maria Joseph suffered complications and went into premature labor in May 1829. The baby, a daughter, lived for only a few hours, and Maria Joseph died 3 weeks later from complications. Ferdinand's denial of the deaths and bizarre attempts to revive them caused the palace to be filled with the stench of decay. Finally, Ferdinand fell into a deep depression, refusing to see advisors and haunted by the death masks of his wives. In 1829, at age 45, Ferdinand faced an unexpected fourth marriage to Maria Cristina of Naples, who was already pregnant by another man. Ferdinand, desperate for an heir, accepted the deception and continued to pretend that the child, Isabella II, was his. The birth should have marked the end of his quest for an heir, but it only added new anxieties. Ferdinand's final years were marked by his continuing sexual dysfunction and paranoia, including midnight raids of his wife's chambers, accusing her of treason. The heavy silence lingers as we close the door to Ferdinand's world. The whispers fade, the echoes of a twisted reign now just a distant murmur. You can almost hear the faint rustling of the royal curtains, gently swaying in the night air. Take a breath, let it all slip away. If this story brought you comfort, if the shadows of history have left you intrigued, consider giving us a gentle like, a quiet share, or subscribing to our world of forgotten tales. There's always more to explore, more to uncover in the stillness of the past. Goodbye, and we will meet again.